Welcome to the Capstone Conversation, where you learn about what's happening in the greater East Bay. I am your host, Jared App. Today, we are joined by Shane Silsby, who is the author of Managing for Meteors. The book is a guide for city managers, city supervisors, county leadership on how to deal with upcoming changes. How do you deal with staff changes, social media communications? How do you plan for future crisis? And it's a good guide for that. Shane and I have had the opportunity to talk about a couple of projects together and look at partnering where we can to help guide cities into the future. Shane, thank you for joining me. And please tell us a little bit more about yourself and about the book.
Thanks, Jared. Thanks for having me today. Great to talk to you on Capstone Conversations. I worked my way across the country through 20 years in government service. Started in Michigan. That was too cold. Went to Arizona. That was too hot. Phoenix for about 9 years, and then ended up in Southern California. Ended up being here and working for the County of Orange for about 6.5 years. Then went to the private sector after that to try to help cities and counties across the country. When you work for one agency, it's great. You can dig in and make improvements there and changes and do great things. But you can only help that agency, generally speaking. I wanted to expand that a little bit. And then on the private side, I learned a little bit more than I saw when I was working with government agencies across the country, that there was a bit of a gap being created in expertise and experience at the leadership level, as all the things that have been happening to the workforce, right? The silver tsunami, the Great Recession, even affecting governments, the pandemic, right? And things that were moving people a little bit out of governments through retirements, whatever the case might be. Then with the job market being such a big issue right now, not only do we have funding to deliver projects, but I refer as a 30-year low in unemployment, but I heard the other day a 50-year low. Either way, people that want a job generally can get one, that are good at what they do. Trying to attract them to the government sector over private sector, where the salaries are a little bit different, work from home conditions are different. All of that has created a pressure on local governments that are struggling to have some leaders with great experience. So that was the genesis for the book, and I wrote it in that way, but that's how I got started.
That has definitely come up in a number of our episodes. I think all three counties here in the East Bay, Alameda, Contra Costa, and Solano, it's gotten better over the last year, but all of them have constant job openings, not to even talk about police openings. Just every level of staffing seems to have vacancies, and a lot of cities have started turning over where staff is saying, hey, we don't want to work for politicians or city managers that are going to bully us or be mean or not create the best working environment, because there are other openings. And so they could stay in CalPERS and they could stay in the system and do that. And so that's come up a number of times. And when you talk about the silver tsunami, it has come up on a previous episode about water. The average engineer at a water agency in California is 68 and a white male who hasn't yet mastered Excel, let alone the concept of Google Docs. And talk about how that comes out into this book and how you help with that.
And that's interesting. You mentioned that average age of 68. One of the things I forgot to mention, I thought was interesting on the low unemployment numbers, the people in the workforce. And by the way, we've got 5 generations in the workforce for the first time in the history, and more people working over 80 than ever in the history of recorded workforce data. The point is, the transitions are happening. The meteors are happening. In the book, we talk about meteors. It's a metaphoric meteor, right? I've had some people say, I read it, I thought I was going to get like a Star Wars thing. No, this is a metaphoric meteor. And so it means different things to different agencies. Obviously, an aging workforce is a potential meteor, right? It's coming at you. You see it. You can see the data and the demographics. Eventually, there's going to be some changeover to help people get their agencies to be as effective and efficient as possible before that major disruptor hits. In this case, we're talking about the workforce, but it could be anything. It could be a big federal funding initiative. It could be a changeover in an elected official or a city leader. It could be a state mandate, anything like that. And the reason why it's important to take a look at how to make your agency efficient and effective, can't prepare once the disruption actually hits your agency. It's too late to prepare at that point. Through the 10 chapters, we hit different subjects that a government agency leader can take advantage of to help prepare them before that disruption hits. Some people might say, I want to know what that disruption is so I can then address and plan for that. That's great. You can do that. But if you don't know what it is, be assured something is going to be happening to your agency. And if that thing never happens to you, congratulations to you. I want to work there. But your agency will just be more efficient and effective to serve your community if the big disruptor never happens.
One of the things you talk about in the book is cyber attacks, right? As a potential disruptor. There were two cities in the East Bay that were recently hit, I think focused on their small police department. But they had cybersecurity, they had IT personnel. One caught it a lot faster, the second one that got hit. But how do they prepare for that other than constantly invest in new technology?
That's a good one to hit. And I'm not a cybersecurity expert, but what I can tell you is that hackers are working every day around the clock. And if you're only working 8 to 5 on cybersecurity, you're leaving all of the nights and weekends to the hackers. In my experiences, like the city halls are getting locked down, maybe the police facilities are getting locked down from a cybersecurity standpoint, but sometimes there are satellite facilities that are vulnerable. And you talked about water, wastewater. Those are the ones that came up more recently in trying to improve the cybersecurity of those satellite facilities through the federal infrastructure bill and trying to address cybersecurity there. For example, you have a pump station that's 12 miles away from City Hall, and you've got a sewer lift station or wastewater treatment plant, substation, not the main plants, but the sub plants that are out there. They used to operate on their own, but to have a more efficient system and know what's going on to avoid maybe a spillage or flooding, whatever, you want to have monitors and gauges and meters at that station to bring information back. Once you do that, now you've opened up an IT connection to that satellite facility. And that facility is the one that may not be as robust as your city hall or police station. That's the next iteration, I think, of cybersecurity, not only working vertically with the software and the hardware, but working horizontally to the other assets and facilities.
Talk about some other areas that these meteors might be focused on.
The big one that I see is volatile funding that addresses cities and counties. Not only the amount of revenue coming in, but the way it's expended if you have a large project. For example, in your community and your city gets, let's say, $5 million a year in to build whatever infrastructure is required for you, roads, bridges, whatever. If you have a project that is $15 million, you may never achieve the ability to pay for that project if you're not strategic in your planning for your funding. If you're 5 million a year and you're delivering projects at 2 million or 3 million or whatever, you're always expending dollars. You're never going to get up you're never going to get $15 million in 1 year just to go build that project. I find a lot of communities are stuck with that big project, the wish list project they can't get off the books. You can go for extra funding, all that stuff. But one of the things that people can do, which I find a lot of agencies have a wish list, but not a capital improvement program, is to actually sit down and be strategic about the money you get, trying to put in external resources, but also creating a reserve to build up to then pay for that larger project. It's not going to be in year one, right? It's going to be year 2 or 3 or whatever, as well as incorporating some of the efficiency efforts and revenue efforts that I talk about in the book too, to enhance some of those streams. And then you can finally get that big project off the book, for example, or look at a financing effort for it, or look at a way to do it a little bit differently. That's one of the biggest things I see is just potentially a way to enhance the strategy for how cities and counties deliver their infrastructure planning, moving from a wish list to a fiscally constrained, resource balanced, strategic plan for their infrastructure.
It sounds like part of that solution is just think about your finances in a way you might at home, right? If you're saving for a big house improvement, like my wife and I have on our list this year, we're going to replace some of all of our kitchen appliances. That's a big financial upgrade. So every month we put away X amount of dollars to be able to buy not one appliance, but 5 new appliances. And cities should look at the same thing, right? How over a year can they say, okay, that's a 5-year outlay. Each year we're going to budget $500,000 towards it or $1 million towards it. And cities don't look at it because you spend exactly what you have. They don't typically think of savings. Is that
I think cities will put savings in like from a general fund standpoint or reserve for pension liabilities and just to cover the general cost of the city. But on the capital side, I don't see it as often. A lot of times cities might say, we can only approve 1 or 2 fiscal years at a time. My budget, it's only 1 fiscal year. But a capital project or a major initiative lasts beyond 1 year. You have to build a plan and a program to then project back to that fiscal year what gets approved, but be able to have a plan to deliver it longer. And the other thing I see in the way that the infrastructure is delivered for a city or county, whatever, and this is general, this is not pointing fingers at anybody, but a lot of times the equation is flipped. If you think about from a budget standpoint, you've got money coming in, that's your revenue. You take away all the operational kind of overhead expenses you have to pay for anyway, right? You got to pay for staff, and you got to pay for the building, and you got to pay for your utilities, all that stuff. And then what you have left for projects usually is after you do that subtraction, then people build in capital projects and they say, I want to build that road or that police station or whatever. And then what's left, they give to operations and maintenance. The challenge there is operations and maintenance fluctuates up and down and needs to be done regardless because of all of the aging infrastructure we have. The right equation is to flip those last two. So revenue coming in, take away your overhead costs, then pay for your operations and maintenance at a level to maintain all of your assets and to have good service. And then what's left is available for capital projects. And the reason why that's important, obviously, is not only are you maintaining your assets to the level they need to be to protect them, but you're not building new infrastructure that you can't actually maintain. There's a nuance there in trying to get into good capital strategies.
A couple of the meteors you're throwing out there: cybersecurity, capital strategies, silver tsunami. What are some other examples of meteors out there that you're trying to tackle?
Just federal funding is the big one, the bipartisan infrastructure law. And what I'm seeing across the country is that people are generally active in the federal grant space, but not fully leveraging the formulaic piece of the bipartisan infrastructure law, federal fund. When Biden and Congress approved the plan, it was 40% was going to grants, which is all the announcements from everybody. 60% was assigned to be formulaic. Formulaic is a population-based allocation, usually in the transportation works. And so what I see is people doing a decent job on getting the grants, but I'm not seeing the formulaic dollars flow down. And those populations are based on the communities where people live. The city you live in has a population that all floats up into the amount of money that California is supposed to be getting through the formulaic allocations. The state's already received 3 years worth of those allocations. That's a meteor coming where you've got federal funding coming into the state at a high level, but the cities and counties are not able to access those funds directly, even though their populations were used to generate the formula to get the money to California. That's a big one I try to help people with all over the state.
Part of what you're advocating for in the book for government officials is less about how to tackle each one of these independently. It's how do you build the infrastructure and the culture within the organizations to do that? How do you attempt to build that infrastructure that can solve these meteors that are coming our way?
That's a great point. First of all, to move things forward in a government setting, from my perspective, you need to have alignment, political alignment, leadership alignment, buy-in from all of the staff to a common vision. And once you have that alignment, then you can actually add funding, then you can actually move things forward. In many cases, and I was told many times, government's not built to be efficient, but a lot of things pull and try to disalign. So gaining alignment is the first thing that you need to do. In the early chapters, I talk about how you can look at the organizational structure to try to do that. And what I find routinely with agencies is that, especially in governments, that the org structure that is there may be the same as 20 years ago, and or it's changed in a way based on personalities versus performance or versus needs. The issues we talked about on workforce demand earlier impact this because if you can't get somebody to fill that role, sometimes you just make do. But what I find is a lot of agencies move from pyramid over time. They move to more of a upside down trapezoid or a square, and that creates some inefficiencies, not only in overhead costs and operational control, but things start to get lost. The more people you have that are trying to just manage and the less people doing work, the more chance there is for something to get derailed, out of alignment, and not having a combined vision there. Early in the book, we talk about getting your organization restructured. And at the end of the day, the more people that you have delivering the services, the more efficient you are and directly impact where you can be. That's one of the things we talk about, Jared, early is just trying to get that set up. And that can also have a cultural approach and saying, look, here's where we're going to focus based on the way our organization is laid out. We talk about that, and then we get into to operational budgeting and what to focus on and how to do that. Talked about capital programming a little bit. Technology is a big piece of it too, between those two things. Think about one of the preparation items from Meteor is having to work remotely, right? Before the pandemic, we were fortunate enough in Orange County to be able to implement a 24/7 virtual online customer service system. When the pandemic hit, other than police and fire, whatever, that was like the only group that was fully operational because it was already built to be virtual and remote. So think about how many agencies needed to hurry and get something done quickly in 2020. Improving technologies now very important for communities to allow potential work from home, but at least access for people to get to their services on a 24/7 basis.
One of the things you and I have talked a bunch about is the process of the SMART goals and how cities should be working to do that and plan for the future. I know a lot of listeners are probably familiar with it, but tell us, what do you mean by SMART goals and how do you go about positioning those?
Yeah, smart. And we can go through a specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-based or relevant, excuse me, relevant, time-based. That's the smart element of it. And that gets back to the cultural alignment, right? So you start with the vision, then you have to come up with goals, right? And you want your goals of your organization to meet what your elected officials have for policy and what your leader wants for initiatives. And that should drive how you establish your goals. Making those goals smart, as we just talked about, makes them more effective. Then from those goals, you create objectives throughout the year to try to meet those goals. The final piece of that we talk about in the book too is key performance indicators to track the progress in real time, how those objectives are doing to then meet the goal. One of the areas of improvement for a lot of agencies, not just government agencies, but is they might start with the goal, which is good, but they might not make it smart. So then they might say, okay, we've got the goal. Now we've made it smart. That's an improvement. But then maybe not following up with the objectives to let different people know what they need to do to reach that goal. And not implementing those key performance indicators to keep people on track every day, headed in the same direction. Because without that, sometimes what happens is you've got an annual goal, and in month 11 of 12 months, all of a sudden you start a bunch of fires to try to get that goal accomplished. If it's a major goal, its chance of success goes down if you're not working on it towards the end result throughout the year. You can't get back time lost.
A lot of what you're talking about is work within the city government to have a look at like strategic planning, right? Cities should be looking at what are our 5 to 10 meteors that might be coming our way, and how do we start preparing in the future for them? That could be saving for a capital improvement project. It could be dealing with retirement or staff turnover. Because you can take a look as a city manager, you know that the average traffic engineer stays for X amount of years. And there's always ups and downs and in it, people who stay for 35 years are in the system for retirement and people that stay for 5 years and go get other jobs. You're talking about building that thought process though in it. Outline what are the meteors you could prepare for as a city manager and then build that culture and the goals around that.
With the changeover that's happening very routinely, succession planning is important for government agencies because if you can't hire the folks externally because of all the demands and challenges we talked about already in the workforce, your only other option other than not doing the work is to hire internally. A formal succession plan is important. We think about even up at the federal level with the president and vice president, speaker of the house, and all that stuff, there's a continuity of government that's established that people generally understand. But then when it comes back to a local agency, sometimes people forget that we should be having the same continuity of government succession planning going on at the local level. The good thing about that is you can address deficiencies early. So if you say, okay, I've got somebody to do that, and you turn to your right and say, I don't have anybody that I can have do that, that becomes a meteor that you need to address. You can do it through workforce development, cross training. You can start to address some of those things. A leader leaves or retires or whatever happens, political issues now at the highest leadership levels. And then it's left to try to figure out, okay, are we going to bring in somebody new? What's going to happen? Staff is confused about what's going on. And then productivity just falls out until some semblance of structure is put back in place. We have the ability to avoid that with some good strategic planning and some strategic thinking. Not easy by any means. And it creates some self-reflection too, in some cases, about the people that you built on your team. Can they actually deliver? Or what do you need to do to help develop that team to be ready for those positions? That's important. And then as the workforce is continuing to change, where we have a generation coming in, which basically skyrocketed over the last 10 to 15 years into leadership positions, but without prior generations, 15 to 20 years of experience before taking on those leadership positions, that's where the succession planning can really point out people that might need some workforce development, cross training, extra mentoring, all those things to get them ready sooner than the prior generations were.
I want to pick up on one word you said, mentoring. It comes up in a lot of conversations with city and county officials, especially at some of the bigger agencies where, yes, they always talk about these mentorship programs and they want to make sure people have the room to get promoted who do, but then they're stuck in the same job for 5 years and you're wondering like, why aren't I getting? What is that opportunity? Everybody loves me. I'm doing a great job. Talk a little bit how cities can put that a mentoring system into place and not just have it in theory.
That's a good question. I've had the opportunity to mentor a lot of different people and had great experiences there. One of the points that I used to offer to folk when they were in this situation about how to get to the next job is working with their supervisor to create stretch goals, to actually do the work of that next level that they might be trying to achieve in their career. And the nuance is you're not asking for extra money or extra recognition to do those things. You're just trying to do those things to improve yourself, develop, and demonstrate your performance. That is something that is sometimes lost on different generations, getting ready for the work before you get the job to get paid for the work. Why I recommend that, it might be inherent, but when you get into the interview, you want to be able to demonstrate, I've already done many of the things that this position is being asked to do. And when you're able to say that, you can reduce the risk for your people selecting or hiring for the position because they can see your track record. What many people try to do, and it's not failed strategy, but it's more difficult, is say, hire me first, then I'll show you what I can do. That's great, but that puts a lot of risk into the decision being made by that selection panel. And if you're obviously next to 5 other people that are saying the same thing, how do you differentiate and how do you reduce that risk? Mentorship's great to get a number of different perspectives, but that's one of them that I continuously tell folks is if you're trying to promote, ask for assignments, do things, don't ask for more money or recognition because anybody can do that. Oh, I'll do more work, but pay me more money. Okay. But then they're less likely to accommodate some of those requests. So simple example on mentorship on what I work people through, but there's a lot of other things to cover there too.
I used to have a boss that would give me more work because they knew I was capable of it. But when it came to the title change or the salary improvement, he didn't believe in that concept. Eventually, why I left. Organizations often talk about that culture, but you really have to be paying attention as a city manager. Where is it going on? And flag people for that throughout the entire chain.
The other piece of it is trying to at your current level or with your current team, put systems in place that have longevity or legacy elements, create good succession for your team so that you're viewed as being able to be pulled out and not have something collapse behind you. Because that can be sometimes, Jared, you're so great in your job that we don't want to put you in another one because we don't have someone to put in your job, right? It's important, even at all levels, to have good teams that can backfill. That discussion comes up. You say, look, we can put Jared in there because John and Sally and Sue are ready to go right behind him. And it also demonstrates your ability to be a good manager and leader because you're doing the things at your level that are going to project to help the organization at the next level.
I want to pick up on one of the most important things that you just said in there, which is Jared is doing a great job. And all of my clients know that. And to everybody else out there, yeah, we rock over here at Capstone. Give us a call.
Yeah. Jared, one of the things that you do a great job at, connections, having conversations, relationships. I think now more than ever, post pandemic, in the virtual world, it's very hard to establish new connections. And if you would have told everybody, okay, you're going to go on to 2 years of virtual work, they might have treated some of their colleagues or relationships or folks better to make sure that those things can carry over to a more virtual environment where you get to see people as often. I think you do a great job of melding those two of the real time and virtual to expand those networks.
It's important. And I encourage people to get back out there and go to networking, no matter what level of the city you're at. And just talking about an engagement and mentorship, it comes up a lot of commissions in cities, which have a number of citizen commissions from planning, transportation, public safety related. People are focused on diversity, but they're not focused on age diversity and bringing in and particularly mentoring into those commissions people who can one day run for city council or just, hey, we need somebody young's perspective on our planning commission for the next 8 to 12 years. That is often not looked at. Now, part of that is, hey, if you're in your 20s, you might not be living in some of the suburban or more rural cities throughout California. What are your suggestions on how cities can look towards those commissions to really engage more people in the community and to use those commissions to communicate more about what the city is doing to the general public?
That's a important thing in communicating what's being done because there's continued government mistrust. I think people are always easy to point at the federal level, but it carries down to the state, and then they end up complaining about maybe their elected officials or their local communities just because it's an easy target, right? Government can't fight back. Communicating effectively on what is being done with the resources that are given to the government agencies is very important. That's why in the book, I also talk about capital project delivery being important because that is an objective thing that can get done that everybody can go to the ribbon cutting and point at, and nobody can argue that's not done, that's not completed. They might argue about the cost. They might argue they didn't like it, but they can argue that's not done and it's been an improvement to their community, right? That's what I love about capital projects. But being able to effectively communicate that is important. That can increase the credibility of your organization. The other thing that I obviously learned on the government side is it's not just trying to do the best job you can at communicating. It's trying to communicate with as many people in the way that they want to be communicated with. So this is why it's difficult sometimes for governments as you think about, okay, I've got maybe a primary mode of communication. Right? We send out, we post it on our website. Maybe that gets 15% of the people. So how can you address the rest of it in today's world where most people say, I want to receive my information the way I want it, when I want it, how I want it, right? Very difficult for governments to react to all that. But using the commission's other tools that you mentioned, I think that's part of the way to do it because the more voices you have of people speaking the same thing or trying to get that message out, I think the more effective it can be.
Certainly capital projects, and that helps when you've increased sales tax for regional transportation issues, or even in cities who want to do public safety, but they also want new parks, right? That's important to show. And I think you're right in terms of the means of communication, because I have clients on Slack, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, email, text. I'm part of a mastermind group and somebody was in there saying they have 8 different emails let alone the five means that I just said of different communication. So they're overwhelmed and bombarded by different things. And that is constantly on some of my city officials' minds is how do they keep up with that? And I would also share, hey, if you've got a good story of success to tell and you're in the East Bay, check out the Capstone Conversation and be a guest because that's what we do. We're here to tell a story of what is happening in our communities in the East Bay.
The East Bay is awesome too. We talked about some of the what's, what should you do and when should you do it, and things like that. But the how is sometimes the difficult. And what I try to do to help people is try to introduce this new kind of industry term called fractional government executive. And people think about a fractional executive in the private sector where Jared can be the CFO for 10 small companies as a fractional CFO, or with your skill set, 100 companies. But the fractional government CEO, the nuance on that is government agencies cannot uh, outsource their leadership, right? You cannot get fractional services for leadership, but certain things are tasked with leaders in government that can be very difficult and they may not have the experience or the time to do it. And so what I offer is, okay, let me come in and deal with that meteor I'm talking about. You're a leader in local government and I have to do all these things on a daily basis. I prepare for council meetings. I got to respond to constituents. I got to sign contracts. I got to manage the staff. I got to look at the budget. And then I need to turn and also deal with this major disruption too, like a new city hall or a new police station or a new, whatever it is, the meteor. The fractional government executive can come in and partner with that local city leader and deal with that meteor because they may have the experience, knowledge, and time, more importantly, capacity to do that. And allows that local leaders to stay focused on all those things that the private sector cannot.
We see that in Contra Costa County with fire departments. There was a merger of a couple of different fire departments, realizing that they were better to get resources together. I think that what you're talking about is a concept where can cities hire two or three people for economic development to write an economic development plan, not necessarily like a big consulting firm, but can three cities chip in on an economic development director? Maybe not cities that are right next to each other, or maybe cities that are right next to each other, depending on what the level is positioned. Is there a trend in cities to do that throughout California? And did I
Uh,
explain it right?
Yeah, I mean that's the authority concept. You hear about authorities, and they're usually set up through GPAs, right? And those are separate entities. And that allows each agency really to bring their own power and authority into a group. And then that new entity, a joint powers authority, it's really that definition. It's joining the powers of all the agencies that put in to a larger effort. And then that separate entity can do things that maybe individually each of those agencies couldn't. It could be delivering regional services. It could be overseeing a project. I was part of a joint powers authority at Orange County where we joined forces with the city of Santa Ana and collectively managed the entire civic center. Yeah, that's a good tool. Sometimes it can be a
Hey,
challenge because it can create new boards or levels of oversight that you have to pay for. Sometimes that can be a challenge, but the intent's good.
I would run it lower than that. And there's an example. I think it is Redwood City and San Carlos and maybe one other city on the peninsula where one city has taken over like HR and payroll and I don't think it's a JPA. They've, in a sense, agreed to a price and just an MOU where you will offer these services. And it was cheaper when this went back a few years when both cities had to look at major budget cuts, I think back in 2009, 2010. How do they combine a couple of services that they're really good at to reduce costs? I think where Shane and I are talking about here is just innovative ways of thinking for planning ahead, especially if you have repeat vacancies in certain departments. Can you fill those through creative ideas? How do you plan for that long term? And that's what managing meteors and this conversation is about.
Yeah, I always cringe when I hear an agency saying we couldn't get that done because we didn't have the staff to do it. But what did you do from the beginning of the project all the way through to try to mitigate that? at the end of the day, the community is the one that might be left without services or that project improvement or whatever the case might be. I appreciate it as a fact, but it's a difficult excuse. Could be working on things every and mitigate that. Easy for me to quarterbacking it, but if it was part of your focus as an agency every day, and by the way, all the things we talked about, alignment of vision, delivering great projects, having a good plan, that also creates an environment where people want to work. So I always laughed when I used to talk to people about a lot of changes were going on where at the county or at the city of Phoenix, and people would complain about it. And I say, I understand change is difficult, but would you rather be at a place that's static or would you rather work for a place that's dynamic? Because you only get dynamic with change. Where do you want to be? And there's not a right or wrong answer, but I think many people are looking for maybe a more dynamic organization. And if you can prove that's what you're doing, you might be able to win more recruiting battles than your partnering cities. But you're right about your point on contracting. That's a great option too, because if you're great at something for your city, offer that through contracting to others.
I love that as a final takeaway. There's a theory in planning. How do you make a city dynamic and innovative and think a little bit differently as we move into the future? And cities are often slow in innovation, but it's building a culture to embrace that. Shane, how do people learn more about managing the meteors and get the book and learn a little bit more about you?
Thanks, Jared. I really appreciate your time today as well. The book Managing for Meteors is available now to you and at Amazon in paperback, hardcover, digital, and now audio. Just launched the audio version there. We have a narrator. You don't have to listen to me for 2 hours, but you have a narrator on your drive home. You can listen to the book. You can go to Amazon, search for Managing for Meteors, or you can go to the website managingformeteors.com and they'll have all the information there and some free exhibits from the book that you can look at as well. Just follow me on LinkedIn, Shane Silsby, through LinkedIn, and I'll get you hooked up there.
And so put all of that into the show notes so everybody can find it. You just scroll down on your phone. It's very easy to just scroll down.
And thanks for having me, Jared.
Thank you so much for being here, Shane. Really appreciate it. Wait, don't leave yet. Hit subscribe. Make sure you get the weekly updates. We have a new episode every Wednesday for stuff happening in the East Bay. In the meantime, follow me on LinkedIn, Jared Ash, or check out our firm where we have a weekly newsletter and blog at Capstone Government Affairs on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today on the Capstone Conversation.